Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to part 3 of this fascinating series that we have called the Qibla Dilemma. In the last 2 parts, we talked about the data that our brother Dan Gibson collected in terms of the direction of Qiblas from mosques that were built within the first 300 years of Islam. And now we're going to turn our attention to some of the objections that were raised naturally against his findings. And we would like really to start with one that we believe is very important to tackle by an expert in the direction of Qibla, Dr. David King. So we called it Dr. King's objection. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn now the topic over to you, Dan, to address this.
Okay, Dr. King is an expert and in his field, and he has his interpretation of the various data and what was going on that's out there, which is fine, and I'm glad that people come along. I learned a lot from Dr. King. He wrote his first article, his first paper in 2017, so that's the year after the film was made. He jumped right in, and he really didn't like what I was suggesting. He didn't like what I was saying, and that I had suggested it was Petra. And so he put out his first paper. He ridiculed the whole idea of mosques facing Petra at all. And he then attacked my personal character and my education and everything else and said I wasn't qualified. And then next year he brought out another paper. And then in 2018, also a paper, The Petra Fallacy. And he really got stirred up about this whole thing because it really disturbed him that somebody would come along and say that Muslims in the earliest part of Islam were facing in a different direction than the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia. And so let me first say that Dr. King, in all of his objections, there were some good things. You always can learn from people, even if they're against you. Sometimes they come up with some good things. And so he raised some good points and made me think about some things that I had said and conclusions I came to. And some of them I went back and realized, no, I still agree with what I said. And so we disagree over some areas, Dr. King and I. Dr. King did not challenge the data. I had examined over 100 mosques from the first 3 centuries of Islam. I gave their Qibla directions, and he didn't challenge those Qibla. He just said, but they're not facing Petra. And he just said, I don't, Gibson doesn't know why they're facing where they're facing. And he does, because he could explain each and every mosque and why it had its Qiblas. That was his argument. So, but Dr. King didn't see anything systematic about it. His opinion and his view was that everything was quite random, and he didn't see specific Qiblas. Dr. King, his opinion came, he developed this actually way back in 1983 when he wrote a paper on a Muslim scholar, al-Bazdawi. I had to go back and read al-Bazdawi and see what is Dr. King saying, and he had picked up on al-Bazdawi. Now, so to understand Dr. King, you must understand al-Bazdawi, because really it's al-Bazdawi's arguments that he's using. Al-Bazdawi wrote around 1010 AD, which is 400 years after the Hijrah. And al-Bazdawi was living in Samarkand, so he's in Central Asia. He's a judge, he's a ruler, he's just an Islamic authority there. And al-Bazdawi is struggling with why some of the mosques in Samarkand, over there in Central Asia, are facing wrong. Now, the main big mosque at that time faced towards Petra, and it just so happens that Petra and where al-Bazdawi was, so he was saying the mosque faces directly west, and so he felt that some people must have prayed along cardinal lines, because he was trying to explain all these various Qiblas that he heard about. He heard about that the people in Fustat over in Cairo, they prayed directly east.
Right.
And so he says, see, some people prayed west and some people prayed east. So in the earliest years of Islam, they just didn't know how to set the Qibla. They couldn't do it right. And during al-Bazdawi's time, a change was happening in the Muslim world. That change was that mathematics was really becoming important, being studied, and really being developed. That's where we get algebra, comes from al-Jabr, and these are all Muslim scholars in Iraq, and they're developing this amazing mathematical abilities, and so they're figuring out spherical geometry. And so al-Bazdawi, he said something very interesting. He said the Muslims of the first century had not smelled the sweet aroma of mathematics. So now we can set the Qibla right using spherical geometry. So before that, he said, they simply didn't know how to do it. And they all had a different reason. Every mosque you look at, you could find out this is why they said it. They were influenced by this or by that idea or so forth. So King came along and he picked up on this. And he said, see, now this is the explanation. Here we have an early Islamic writer. Well, he's 400 years after the founding of
that's not early.
So he's several hundred years later.
I was saying that's not early.
No, it's not early. But I mean, this is where Dr. King comes along. And so he uses this and he says, really what happened is somebody would go on a pilgrimage to Mecca and they would see something about the Kaaba building when they're there, maybe a star that was above it. And so they remember that star and they went home and they could kind of line up, wow, wherever I was standing there. And I struggle with that because most people are going around the Kaaba rather, so getting the Kaaba direction and where it is and where it is in relation to the way back home. So I would have, if that was true, I would have expected to find random Qiblas all over the place. If al-Bazdawi was right, there must be some random ones and there might be some systematic ones. So al-Bazdawi is the first thing that we have to realize. And then Dr. King tells us that, Muslims just didn't know how to do it. And it was, and so that created for me a theological problem. So I'm come to you to ask you, Al-Fadi, does this make sense to you that Allah would ask Muslims to pray in a specific direction? In the Quran, in Surah chapter 2, he says, you have a Qibla.
That's right.
Okay? That is to face Masjid al-Haram. Would Allah ask him to do that when it would take him another 300 or 400 years to figure out how to do that?
Well, I mean, if we're going to use the argument that Allah is a true God who is the author of the Quran, you would expect him to give him specific directions. Now, in the Quran, there are many other specific things that were mentioned about fasting, making up for the, breaking of the fast, how to give alms and, numbers, in relation to giving alms and so many other rituals. How come when it came to the most important one, which is facing the direction of Mecca or the Qibla in prayer, which is the 5 times a day done by Muslims to connect with Allah basically and bow down to him, why was he casual about those and not casual about the rest of them?
Not only casual, he gave them something impossible to do.
That's right.
According to Dr. King's theory, they didn't know how, and it took them 300 years to figure out how to do it right.
But al-Bazdawi was able to tell there was something wrong with the direction of the Qibla.
That's right. There are many writers, once you get into 400, 500 AD, the first thing these mathematicians seemed to tackle was, how do we tell a true Qibla direction? And they kept writing about how did the friends of Muhammad,
Sahaba,
al-Nabi, how did they set those first Qibla directions? This was a burning question for the next 300 years.
That's right.
Because people, later they're like, we don't know how they did that. Why are mosques facing this way and this way? Because they could go out and see that, and they were troubled by that.
Right,
as they should. So they were, pardon me?
As they should. They should be
as
troubled.
they should be troubled.
Yeah.
So I have a problem accepting Dr. King's suggestion that it was just random and they just pick some aspect. So Dr. King has an explanation for every mosque and if you bring up a new one he's never gone to, he will come up with an explanation, because he says, well, maybe the equinox is in that direction, or maybe the certain stars, and he has different ones that similar to the Kaaba, that star, well, maybe you can find some relation there. And so he has come up with things for every mosque that you face. He comes up with a new individual explanation for that mosque and how they must have calculated that direction.
How many mosques did he visit physically?
By his own confession, he visited only the mosque in Samarkand.
One.
That's the only one he may have visited, but he never measured any other Qiblas.
All right. How many did you go to and measure?
I'm not sure. Now, I've never counted that number. We're trying to think back the other day. Now, I don't know, dozens and dozens of them. I was in China. I measured the mosques in China. I was in all across Jordan, down in Yemen. I was up in through Jordan, of Saudi, the Gulf states, visited those and so forth. So trying to get this. And when I couldn't actually get to one, I could get a satellite image. Well, I could maybe find an archaeological report that helped. If I can not, a last resort, I can get a satellite image, and then I can look down on it and see if I can measure it and see if it fits the pattern. And so there's lots of ways of measuring these things. So I measured a lot. He only measured a few. He said he didn't need to measure them, because he could look and say, okay, if it faces that direction, then here's probably what they did, and come up with some reason.
So to wrap up this particular argument from a theological standpoint, what is the ramification of his interpretation of that?
That's what I'm asking, because I'm not a Muslim theologian. And so my question is just, this doesn't make sense to me that God would ask Muslims to do something
and that is
they
true.
Couldn't do.
Yeah, and that's what I'm asking.
And when I look at the data, it didn't seem that that's what God asked. It seems like they could do this. And when I went back and started studying Islamic history and started studying the navigators and navigation even in pre-Islamic times, I found out, yes, those merchants back then, the Nabateans who were pre-Islamic times, they could take a camel caravan and they could look at where they wanted to go, a city, and they could take it right across the desert, and they could aim their camel caravan straight across the desert and arrive at that city within a few kilometers of being correct from the other side of the desert, and it's over the horizon. They had centuries and centuries of practice doing that as navigators. But Dr. King never read the navigators. I discovered that he read the astronomers. And so we'll talk about that in the next video as we get going there.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for addressing this, legitimate objection, but sadly lacks enough data to back it up. In fact, the objection, as you stated earlier, was not based on the data itself, was just based on possible explanations of what might have happened. In fact, we don't even know if there was anybody who wrote before the Bazdawi stating that we did not really know how to build these mosques facing Mecca. We did our best, or something to that extent. So, well, brother, thank you so much. I look forward to the next objection that we will tackle next time. Everyone, hopefully you're enjoying all of this.
We'll still talk a bit more about Dr. King in the next one.
Wonderful. We will visit that as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi, over and out. God bless you, and we'll meet next time. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.